Okay, we are in chapter 5 of the book of Matthew, and we have been slowly trudging through the Beatitudes, which is Jesus's first big sermon that he gives when he starts his public ministry. And it's the beginning of what's referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus standing on a mountainside and people kind of like sitting around him, lower than him, listening to his teachings. It's one of his longest sermons that's like transcribed, like it's not just like concepts, it's like kind of more like word for word, if that makes sense. Um, More detailed, I guess would be the point I'm trying to make. And um, he kind of like hits the ground running in his public ministry because he's kind of like really putting on its head all of the Jewish concepts that they had. So just remember that this message that he's giving is very different than what, the Jews have been following at this point. We covered the first four, I believe. Yes, the last few days. So, Kristen covered the first two. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and blessed are those who mourn. And we know that the Bible commentators that we were reading, um, discussed that, it really is almost like a code of ethics. Like these are characteristics and traits that God identifies in his believers. And so, when we want to try to self-examine and say, do I have true faith in Christ? I would possess these characteristics and traits. Um, and so the first one is blessed is the poor in spirit. And I mean, truly, I like to think of this one about like a sense of awareness. Only when we are aware of our sin can we deal with it. And so a person who can identify that they are poor in spirit is a person who is moldable and teachable and uh, you know, coachable by God. And so when a person is poor in spirit, he or she is recognizing that. And it's almost like you're at the bottom, so you can only go up from there. And the reward that God is giving them in this beatitude is for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Second is blessed are those who mourn. And John MacArthur, the commentator that I read, said that it's truly about those who mourn over their sin. So, when we think about our sin, it's not just something bad. It really is. You need to look at our sin from the perspective of God. Like it is the thing that separates us from God. And so we should be as brokenhearted and, you know, um, disgusted with our sin as God is. And we should not be reveling in our sin. And I had kind of shared with you that once before, this lady had come to me and she was like, I just love being Catholic because I can just do whatever I want to do as long as I go and confess to the priest. And then after that, I just follow what he says. I say 10 Hail Marys or whatever. And then my sins are forgiven. And that is not a person who's mourning over sin. So that attitude is not one that would indicate to me that they're a real believer because, you should be mourning over your sin. You shouldn't be reveling in it or celebrating it. The third one we covered was blessed are those who are meek. And like, what is meek? It's a person who is susceptible to influence, and a person who is submissive. So think about it. God says that, that's a characteristic he likes to see in believers because then they are susceptible to his teaching. They're moldable, they're coachable, they're submissive to his will. They're not so full of pride that they can't get out of their own way. And so meekness is a good thing. And then The last one we covered is blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And we talked about hunger and thirst in this context really being something that is extreme, not the kind of hunger and thirsting that we think of on a daily basis, like, oh, I didn't get to eat lunch today. I'm really hungry. No, like hunger and thirst from a place of like poverty or, um, just not having access to water for an extended period of time, that there is no other solution that is going to solve the problem that you have but food or water. That you cannot think of any other thing until you solve that problem first. And when we think of food and water, guys, we think of like that's the foundational, principles of life. We have to eat, we have to drink. And so when Jesus says here that, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, what he's ultimately saying is that our desire to be living a life pleasing to God should exceed every other desire that we have. And so um, that should be in the forefront of our mind. It should be paramountly important to us. Um, and it should be one of our main focuses, that we are constantly trying to um, just honor God in gratitude for the sacrifice that He's made for us, if that makes sense. Um, and then today we'll probably be able to cover the last few. So the next one is blessed are we covered this one yesterday. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. We talked about how this is not a true, like, manipulative tactic where we say, well, I'm going to be merciful to this person because I have it within my power to punish them or whatever. I have it within my power to make things uncomfortable for them. And if I show them mercy, then they'll show me mercy back. What we're doing right there is we're doing something for our own personal gain. And that John MacArthur, the commentator I read, said that is not the focus of what this beatitude is. It's that we ought to show mercy to other people because God has been merciful to us. And He will show mercy to us. We love God so much and we are so gracious. We're so thankful for His grace and His mercy that we want to extend that same mercy to others because they may not know the mercy of God if it was not for us being the hands and feet of Jesus to them. That's the kind of mercy this beatitude's truly talking about. Not Jesus even says in His ministry, He says, if you only love those who love you, what reward are you reaping? Because even Gentiles do that. So, I like to, we see this with our clients all the time. If you're just nice to people who are nice to you, and you're never nice to people who are mean to you, then how, as a Christian, is that setting you apart? I tell my clients all the time, person A does something to person B that's mean, and so person B does something back mean to person A in trying to seek their own justice. But then at the end of the day, all the judge has is two people doing mean things to each other, you know? And so if you really want to gain favor with the judge, what you ultimately do is when someone does something mean to you, you take the high road. And then when they do something mean to you again, you take the high road again. And you extend grace to them when they don't deserve it. And guess what? At the end of the day, the judge is able to easily identify who the problem is and who's the person who's, being reasonable and doing the right thing. And y'all, that's so true as part of our lives. We are not setting ourselves apart in the eyes of God if we are only being nice to the people who are nice to us. Um, so the next one is blessed. So we're in chapter 5, the book of Matthew, verse 8. It says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I kind of feel like though the next two kind of almost go together. Blessed verse 9, blessed are peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Um, so, I mean, we think about pure in heart. I would think of the word sincere. Blessed is a person who is sincere. Jesus talks a lot about um, the condition of our hearts and truly trying to perform that self evaluation where we try to decide if we truly are a believer and we're um, the way we live our lives is a natural fruit of that belief, or if we are doing things in our own strength in an effort to achieve salvation. Um, a Christian who has a pure heart is one who has no ulterior motives. There's nothing that is self-serving. And even when God would extend his wrath on you for whatever, you still are thankful for his direction. So think of a pure heart as just a truly open one, submissive one, and one that just loves God. And so I want us to, that be a reflection point for us today. Like, what is the source of the things we do? Whenever the religious leaders went to John the Baptist, they asked him, they said, "Who are you and why do you do what you do?" And one time in church, Pastor Matt posed that question to us. He said, just as the religious leaders asked John the Baptist, "Who are you and why do you do what you do?" That question is posed to us. Who are we and why do we do what we do? And so if our efforts, the things that we do, our works, if they are, I want you to truly sit down and think about that today. Are we doing things to gain favor with other people? Are we doing things because we feel like if we're a good enough person, we can, in some way achieve salvation? Um, are we doing are we doing things because it makes us feel good? Or we like the favor that we gain with other people whenever we do good things. Because listen, the Bible is very clear that at the end of the day, whenever the source of us doing those things is not to honor God and glorify Him, then all of those works get burned up in the fire and they mean nothing because you've already received your reward. If you did it for a pat on the back, then you've already received your reward. And so we need to decide, like, who are we? Are we true Christians? Or are we people who have a leg on each side of the fence? Are we really diving in to our faith? Um, or do we have ulterior motives? And then ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? Is it in an effort to honor God? And listen, sometimes in doing something, I get caught up in the details of it or whatever. And a lot of times we have to step back and say, yeah, okay, well, I'm gonna speak for myself. I have to step back and say, like, why am I doing this? What is the purpose? What is the mission? What is the goal? And are my actions in line with that goal? And so, and if the goal is to glorify God, then it doesn't matter if anybody else thinks that that's a good idea or not. It doesn't matter if you get told whatever, if you get called whatever, because the source of why we're doing what we're doing is a pure heart and it's in an effort to glorify God. And this beatitude says, for they will see God. So a person who is acting from the place of a pure heart is a person who will see God. And it says, that whenever we die and we are in heaven, that we will be in the presence of God. And many times in the Bible, like if we think of Moses, he saw God and he was in his presence. And he longed for his presence. We talked about that when we talked about hungering and thirsting for righteousness. he had a desire to be in the presence of God, just as a person who's super thirsty would have a desire to drink water. And so, do we have a pure heart such that we will be in the presence of God? So that's our thinking point for today. Well, one of them. The next one that I said kind of is similar is blessed are peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. I feel in my mind these kind of go together because a person who has a pure heart is a person who is a peacemaker. I guess in my line of work, we see a lot of people who just like to add fuel to the fire at all times. That's all they want to do is ignite problems and, create cloudiness and conflict. And I have to believe that's a learned behavior because I don't know, maybe we deal with so much conflict that I am constantly trying to not be involved in conflict. Um, I mean, blessed are peacemakers. So ask yourself in your life, are you a peacemaker? Are you a person who, when you have conflict with someone, are trying to come up with some sort of a resolution, or are you okay in reveling in the conflict? Or are you trying to come at a new angle or focusing on getting back at them or seeking revenge or all those things? If truly, guys, if we are meek in the eyes of God and susceptible to molding and teaching and coachability, and we are desiring to glorify Him, and we are being merciful, and we have a pure heart, then being a peacemaker is going to flow naturally from that. It's not going to be something that's forced. Um, think about, wait, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. Um, I had to let somebody in the waiting room. My apologies. Um, I kind of use this thought process whenever I'm dealing with clients. And it's a lot of times what they don't want to hear, but I'll share it with you because I feel like it's kind of helped me in my life. And I feel like I tie it to this desiring to be a peacemaker and an ingratitude of what God's done for me. But whenever you're in a conflict with someone, the first thing that we should be doing is performing self inventory. The first thing we should do is say, how am I contributing to this conflict? Like, what did I do that got us here? And listen, the world would tell you that it's someone else's fault, okay? And so, maturity and spiritual maturity and really being in tune with the scriptures and what God says, um, has really not a lot to do with what other people have done, but how we respond to it and how are we contributing to it. So it really involves self-examination. So I want you, like, if you're in conflict right now with someone or, um, you can see a pattern that you consistently get in conflict with people, then the first thing we need to be doing is performing this self-examination and saying, how have I contributed to this conflict? What have I brought to the table that has led it this way? And guys, we need to not be upset at the idea that we are wrong sometimes. Apologizing and recognizing, listen, in the law, there's this concept called comparative fault, where we actually assign percentages of fault to people for a particular problem. So if we say, like, okay, there was a car accident and like car A is at fault 40%, car B is at fault 40%, and um, 20% is like an act of God. Like we actually assign fault. So I want you to think about this when you're in conflict with someone, there is some percentage of fault that is yours. And the fact that the other person's done something to you that's really bad, I put a pin in that. But first, we need to deal with ourselves. Okay. So the fact that someone did something bad to you, doesn't negate the fact that we probably did something bad too. And whenever we are not willing to admit that, guys, that is what's called pride. And the Bible speaks against that. Pride comes before the fall. And so we need to be okay with saying that we did something wrong, you know? And I know the world doesn't teach you that, but the Bible definitely teaches you that. And so, guys, I've come to see that whenever you come to the table in a conflict with someone and you say, look, I recognize I have contributed X to this problem and I apologize about that. But I would like to see how we can fix what we have right here and go forward. And listen, that's uncomfortable because it requires a level of mature accountability and your willingness to accept your own faults. But guys, I feel like that is what being a peacemaker is about. It's we need to let go of trying to be right all the time. Like, it doesn't matter about being right. Think about your marriage. Think about, listen, I am trained in arguing with people. That is my job. It's what I do for a living. And my husband is not. And I could tailor every argument and make him out to be the villain every single time. Like, literally went to school for it. But I have become mature in my faith and I have recognized that, you know what? My need to be right is less than my need to, or my desire to please God. And am I being God honoring in my marriage if I am constantly telling my husband that he's wrong? No, it's not God honoring. Sometimes I need to let it go, you know, and uh, that's not comfortable. But you need to stop listening to the world because all those other people, their marriages are ending in divorce and they're having affairs and they're doing all the things. So I want you to think about whether you're a peacemaker today. Like, what are we doing in our lives? Are we the common denominator in all these conflicts? And you may tell me, Jure, I don't want to admit that I'm wrong because I don't want the other person to be right. I don't want them to think that they won. I hear that all the time. Guess what? That doesn't matter. Like, you should be less worried about what other people think and more worried about what a holy God is going to say about us whenever we get to the pearly gates. The Bible says that we will be accountable for every hollow word. And I, for one, have enough to talk to him about that I'm not trying to add to it. And so, guys, like we pretend that that encounter is not going to happen one day, but it absolutely will. And so we need to stop worrying about what other people think. Oh, well, she's weak if she gives in to this situation. You know what? If the world calls me weak, but God calls me holy, sign me up every day of the week. That is what matters. We need to be far-sighted. Eternity is a long time to have it wrong. And so, y'all, pleasing God is paramount, in this situation. So the last one, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We kind of just talked about that. Like the world is not gonna want to see, I hear all the time, like, we need to be strong women who don't need a man and um, who are not susceptible, who are not submissive and not, uh, just all the things. We shouldn't be submissive wives. We shouldn't enjoy or celebrate the fact that we are called by God to raise children and clean houses and do laundry and all that our husbands should be submissive to us. And think of all the rhetoric there is out there about who we should be as women. And I've come to see in my own life that the biblical teaching of who a woman should be, a Proverbs 31 woman who wakes up before her family and goes to sleep after her family and follows her husband's good direction and prays for her children, and that kind of woman, the woman that the Bible says God finds pleasing, she is not popular in the world. She's not. And so think about this here. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. I have been called every name in the book because people don't understand. If the Lord calls me to minister to someone who may have a criminal background, guess what? That's what I'm going to have to do. Whether that hurts my credibility among the world doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't. Like at the end of the day, if the Lord called me to do that, that's what he called me to do. He called Jesus to eat with sinners and tax collectors. Why would I be any different, you know? And so I want you to think about that to yourself. Are you not seeking righteousness because you're afraid of being persecuted? Are you not being a submissive wife because you're afraid what your friends are going to say about you? Listen, they're not your friends. I've had a friend once who came to me about marriage advice, and I explained to her that, like, I know that this is not a popular idea, but you need to let your husband stand in the role in your household that he deserves and show him the respect that he deserves. And then he will become the man of God that the Lord's called him to be. And you need to stop usurping his power and his authority over your family. And you need to stand in the role God called you in your household. And guess what? I was all the words in the book. I She talked about me to everyone. She's not some submissive woman. Um, she posted all kind of crazy things on the internet, how that's laughable and who am I? That's the most insane thing she's ever heard, and blah, 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 blah. You know what? Say what you want. That's completely fine with me. But I know what a Proverbs 31 woman looks like. I know that she's pleasing to God. I know that following the Lord has blessed my marriage in ways that I never thought possible. I know that following the Lord's will for my life has changed my husband's trajectory of his life. Um, and if you want to call me all the names in the book, then go for it. I'm completely fine with that. I have big shoulders. And so y'all don't be afraid to be persecuted for seeking righteousness. I know that the ways of the Bible are not worldly acceptable. And I completely understand that. But we have to let that go. We need to stop worrying about what people think. You know, they'll lie about you, they'll come up with insane things to say about you. Um, you know what? I don't want the approval of man. It doesn't matter to me. And it shouldn't matter to you. So, okay, well, that is kind of almost the end of the Beatitudes. Um, Today's Wednesday. So tomorrow and Thursday we'll be able to cover verses 11 and 12. Um, but because this is Jesus's like first, big sermon, it is, I would say, profoundly important because it kind of sets the tone for his public ministry. So that's kind of why we're like going through it so slowly. But I think that that's a good thing. I think that we need to pick up these pieces um, that the Lord has set out for us. So I will stop recording and I will see y'all tomorrow.